Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Records indicate that last month you traveled via first-class accommodations from New York to San Francisco, a distance of 2,900 miles, specifically to address a climate conference regarding the critical necessity of banning private aviation and reducing air travel. Could you please provide an explanation for this discrepancy? The voice posing the inquiry carried a subtle Louisiana drawl, projecting a demeanor that was disarmingly calm and almost gentle. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was positioned near the rear of the auditorium, holding a tablet device in one hand. She did not offer an immediate response. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez found her gaze fixed upon the tablet he had just placed on the table at the forefront of the stage. Even from a distance of 20 rows back, the image was distinct on the projection screen positioned behind her. It was her American Express billing statement, highlighting a charge of $1,427 for Continental Airlines Flight 1847 from JFK to SFO, clearly marked as first class in bright yellow. 1,500 students and faculty members sat immobilized within the Georgetown University auditorium. They had assembled for a climate leadership forum, eager to hear AOC articulate her vision for the Green New Deal, discuss climate justice, and explain how the younger generation was destined to salvage the planet. They had been queuing since 4 o'clock that afternoon to secure advantageous seating, and they had been chanting her name enthusiastically upon her entrance. They had certainly not anticipated that the Speaker of the House would appear armed with receipts, quite literally. That constitutes a violation of privacy. AOC's voice resonated with a defensive sharpness. How did you even acquire my credit card information? These are public congressional financial disclosures, Johnson replied, his tone remaining conversational. You disclosed this information yourself, ma'am. As mandated by law, I am merely reading what you filed with the House Ethics Committee. He reached into the folder he was carrying and extracted another document, this one thicker, stapled, and appearing official with federal letterhead. Regarding your Tesla, the Model S you purchased last year, it is a beautiful vehicle. I have driven one myself, and they are indeed fast. You paid $89,000 for it. Are you aware of where Tesla sources the lithium required for those batteries? A prolonged pause ensued, during which the auditorium became so silent that the hum of the ventilation system was audible. I am not going to sit here and be interrogated about my personal life, she began. Child labor mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Johnson continued, his voice maddeningly composed. Cobalt is extracted by children as young as 6 years old, laboring in conditions that would be deemed illegal anywhere in the United States, carrying rocks and breathing toxic dust for approximately $1 a day. He pressed on. Your vehicle, the one you utilize to drive to climate rallies, and the one you have posted photographs of yourself in, was constructed upon the foundation of child slavery. Were you aware of that fact when you purchased it? The room fell into a deathly silence. These were her supporters, climate activists, members of the Sunrise Movement, Democratic Socialists of America, and progressive students who had skipped classes to be present. They had arrived seeking inspiration and were entirely unprepared for this confrontation. A young woman near the front, perhaps 19 years of age, tentatively raised her hand and asked, Is that true about the children? AOC stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the stage floor, the sound amplified through the microphone system. This is ambush journalism, she declared. This is your voting record, your financial disclosures, and your public statements, Johnson countered, still not having raised his voice. All I am doing is inquiring if you live by the standards you demand from everyone else. She was already in motion, not running but walking rapidly toward the side exit, her heels clicking audibly on the stage floor. She left her notes on the podium, left her water bottle, and left the microphone live so that everyone could hear every step. until the door closed behind her. Johnson remained standing there for a moment, gazing at the empty stage, before turning to the stunned audience. "I possess 30 more pages of disclosures if anyone wishes to view them." Silence reigned for a moment. Then, from somewhere in the middle rows, a male student's voice rang out, "Yes, show us." And that was the moment when the situation deteriorated significantly for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. To fully comprehend how matters reached this point, how the progressive movement's brightest star imploded in a Georgetown auditorium on a Tuesday night, one must return to 2 hours earlier when she walked into that building anticipating another triumph. It was Tuesday afternoon, January 13th, 2026, at Georgetown University's Gaston Hall, a neo-Gothic auditorium that appeared as though it belonged in a Harry Potter film. The Climate Leadership Forum had been in development for months, with 3 student organizations pooling their resources to bring it to fruition. The Georgetown chapter of the Sunrise Movement, the Democratic Socialists of America Student Group, and the Climate Justice Coalition. Promotional posters were ubiquitous across campus, depicting AOC in that iconic pose from her first campaign, arms crossed. An intense stare, the kind of look that communicated she was not there to play nice, with text that read, "A green new future is possible," in bold green letters. And below that, an evening with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Tickets had sold out in under 3 hours when they went live 2 weeks prior. The auditorium held 1,500 people, but they could have filled it 3 times over. By 6 p.m., students were lined up around the block. The energy electric. These were true believers, kids who had entered activism because of her, who had knocked on doors in 2022 and 2024 because she inspired them, and who genuinely believed that democratic socialism could save America and the planet. Inside, the organizers were conducting last-minute technical checks, testing microphones, and adjusting lights. A student named Maya Chen, president of the Sunrise chapter, was backstage reviewing the run of show for the 20th time. "She speaks for 45 minutes, Maya said to her co-organizers. "Then we do Q&A for 30, followed by a reception in the side room for donors and student leaders." Someone asked if the live stream was functional. "Yes, we have 3 cameras. This is going to be huge for our social media." They had no idea how correct they were, just not in the manner they expected. In the backstage dressing room, AOC was with her team. There were 5 of them crammed into a space meant for 2. Her communications director, Marcus Valdez, her press secretary, Jen Fitzgerald, 2 legislative aides, and her boyfriend, Riley Roberts. They had flown down from New York that afternoon. Coach, actually, on this flight, a detail the irony of which would soon become apparent. "Okay, talking points," Marcus said, flipping through note cards. "Hit the urgency, we have less than a decade to prevent catastrophic warming. Hit the justice angle, marginalized communities suffer first and worst. Hit the jobs narrative. Green New Deal means millions of good-paying union jobs." AOC was checking her makeup in the mirror, adjusting her hoop earrings. She wore a forest green blazer over a white shirt, looking professional yet approachable. She had performed this routine hundreds of times by now: cable news, late-night shows, college campuses, union halls, and she knew how to work a room. "What about the tax?" one of the aides asked. "If someone challenges the cost, I pivot to what inaction costs," AOC said, without looking away from the mirror. "We cannot afford not to act. The fossil fuel industry has externalized the cost of climate destruction for decades, and it is time to internalize it." "Perfect," Jen said. "I always do," AOC replied, smiling confidently. This was her crowd, her people. Georgetown students were essentially her demographic: young, educated, progressive, and idealistic. So this was going to be easy. "One thing," Marcus said, looking at his phone. "Mike Johnson just RSVP'd." AOC turned around. "What?" The speaker? Why? University policy? Marcus explained. Any elected official can request to attend. He asked if he could sit in the audience and maybe ask a question during Q&A. AOC exchanged glances with her team. Riley spoke up. Is that normal? It's weird, Marcus admitted, but we can't really say no. And honestly, it might play in our favor. If he asks some Republican gotcha question, you shut it down. The crowd boos him, and we get a viral clip of you owning the speaker. Could be good content. AOC nodded slowly. Okay, fine. Let him come. Let him embarrass himself in front of 1,500 progressives. What they did not know, what they could not have known, was that Mike Johnson had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment not with policy papers or economic models, but with her receipts. 3 weeks earlier, Johnson's chief of staff, Tom Emmer, had walked into the speaker's office with a thick folder. Sir, you wanted me to pull AOC's financial disclosures. Johnson looked up from the budget proposal he had been reading. Everything since she took office. Everything public. Financial disclosures, FEC filings, credit card statements. She is required to report property records. The works. Tom dropped the folder on the desk. It was 3 inches thick. There is a lot here. Johnson opened it, started reading, and within 5 minutes he was taking notes. Her Tesla, he said, $89,000. When did she buy that? Tom flipped through his notes. March 2025. Paid cash, according to the disclosure. Cash! Johnson repeated. How much was she worth when she took office? Basically nothing. Under $10,000 in assets? She was a bartender, and now north of $1 million? Maybe closer to 1.2? Johnson leaned back in his chair. He was a lawyer before he was a politician, and he knew how to build cases. And what he was seeing in these disclosures was a case that built itself. Get me everything she said about luxury cars, about flying, about consumption, every public statement, every interview, every tweet. You thinking what I think you're thinking? Tom asked. I'm thinking she has built a career telling people to sacrifice, to consume less, to give up comfort for the planet, and I want to see if she is making those sacrifices herself. It took 2 weeks to compile everything, and the result was a document that laid out side by side what AOC said versus what AOC did, the rhetoric versus the reality, and the gap was enormous. When Johnson saw that Georgetown was hosting a climate event with AOC, he smiled. Request an invitation, he told Tom. Tell them the speaker would like to attend and ask a few questions. They will let you. University policy says they have to. And I want to do this in front of her people. Not on Fox News, not in a congressional hearing, but in front of the students who believe in her. Let them see who she really is. Now, at 6:45 p.m., Johnson arrived at Gaston Hall through a side entrance. He had 2 staffers with him and his security detail, and he was dressed in a simple navy suit, no tie, understated. He did not want this to be about him. He wanted it to be about her. The student organizers looked nervous when they saw him. Maya approached cautiously. Speaker Johnson, we weren't sure you would actually come. Wouldn't miss it, Johnson said pleasantly. Where should I sit? We can put you in the front row. Back is fine, Johnson said. I am just here to listen, and maybe ask a question if there is time. He took a seat in the back left section, row 20. He had his folder, the 3 inches of documents distilled down to 30 key pages. Financial disclosures, quotes, photos, all cross-referenced, all documented, all public record. He sat quietly as the auditorium filled up, watching the students file in, excited and energetic, wearing their Sunrise Movement shirts and Bernie Sanders pins. They had no idea what was about to happen. At 7 p.m. sharp, the lights dimmed. Maya walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Tonight, we have the honor of hosting one of the most courageous, most visionary leaders in American politics. Please welcome Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The place erupted into a standing ovation before she even appeared. Chants of AOC, AOC, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, and then she walked out from stage right, waving, smiling, that million-watt smile. She looked genuinely happy, for this was her element, these were her people, and she could feel the love in the room. She took the microphone from Maya and waited for the cheering to die down. "Wow," she said, laughing. "Thank you. Thank you so much. It is so good to be here at Georgetown with all of you." More cheers ensued. You know, when I was bartending in the Bronx just a few years ago, I never imagined I would be standing in front of brilliant young people like you, talking about how we are going to save our planet and build a better future. But here we are, and I am here because of you, because young people refused to accept that climate catastrophe was inevitable, because you organized, because you voted, because you demanded more. Applause followed, along with that progressive finger snap applause that sounds like rain. For the next 40 minutes, she was on fire. She talked about the science of climate change with the fluency of someone who had been studying it for years, about environmental racism, and about how poor communities and communities of color bore the brunt of pollution and extreme weather. She discussed the Green New Deal not as a wish list but as a necessity, as the only viable path forward. "We are told we can't afford it," she said, her voice rising with passion. "But we can't afford not to do it. Every year we delay costs us more in money. Yes, but more importantly, in lives, in futures, in the habitability of our planet." The audience was enraptured. Students were taking notes and filming on their phones. This was the AOC they had come to see. The fighter, the visionary, the one who told them a better world was possible. "And here is what the fossil fuel industry doesn't want you to know," she continued. "This isn't about individual choices. It is about systemic change. Yes, we all need to do our part, but we can't recycle our way out of climate catastrophe. We need to transform our economy. We need to hold corporations accountable. We need to prioritize people and planet over profit." More applause and more snapping followed. The wealthy, and I mean the really wealthy, the billionaire class, they are the ones driving consumption. Private jets, yachts, mansions that use more energy in a month than a working family uses in a year. They are the ones who need to sacrifice, not working people who are just trying to survive. She was building to her conclusion. So when people ask me, "Is the Green New Deal realistic?" I say, what is realistic is that we have about 8 years to cut emissions in half or face irreversible warming. What is realistic is that we have the technology, the resources, and the will to do this. The only question is whether we have the courage. And looking at all of you, I know we do. A standing ovation occurred, with the entire auditorium on its feet. She stood there soaking it in, smiling and waving. This was going exactly as planned. "Okay," she said, when people finally sat down, "I think we have time for some questions. Let's hear from you all." Maya stepped forward with a microphone to take questions from the audience. Hands shot up everywhere. Maya pointed to a young woman in the third row. "Hi, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for being here. My question is about—" "Excuse me," a voice called from the back. "I have a question first, if that is okay." Everyone turned. Mike Johnson was standing in row 20, back left. The energy in the room changed instantly, with some boos and some confused murmurs filling the air. AOC's smile faltered just slightly. Maya looked uncertain. "Speaker Johnson, we usually take questions from students first." "I understand," Johnson said pleasantly, "but I did RSVP specifically to ask the Congresswoman a few questions. University policy says elected officials can participate. I will be brief, I promise. Maya looked at AOC. AOC nodded tightly. It's fine. Let him ask. Johnson smiled. Thank you, Congresswoman. I really did enjoy your talk. Very passionate. I want to ask about implementation. Implementation? AOC said carefully. Yes, ma'am. You have talked a lot tonight about sacrifice, about how the wealthy need to change their consumption patterns, about how we all need to do our part for the climate. I am curious how you are implementing those principles in your own life. Can we talk about that? And that was when the temperature in the room changed, because suddenly this wasn't about policy. This was about her. AOC shifted her weight slightly, her expression guarded. I try to live consistently with my values. Yes, I am glad to hear that, Johnson said. He was still standing in the back, speaking clearly so his voice carried. Because you mentioned private jets, you said they should be banned. That even commercial air travel needs to be dramatically reduced. I think your exact words were, he pulled out his phone and read from it. No one needs to fly cross-country for a vacation. That is a luxury we can't afford anymore. Do you remember saying that in the context of the climate emergency, that we need to reduce unnecessary air travel? Yes, she replied. So I am curious about your trip to San Francisco last month. December 14th, you flew from New York to speak at a climate conference. That is 2,900 miles each way. There is a train, Amtrak, which takes about 3 days and has much lower emissions. Why didn't you take the train? There was a pause. You could feel the audience starting to pay attention in a different way, as this was no longer abstract policy. I have congressional obligations. I can't spend 6 days traveling. But the conference was Friday through Sunday, Johnson noted. You flew out Thursday night, flew back Monday morning. So you had Thursday to fly out, Monday to fly back. You could have left Tuesday, arrived Friday, been there for the conference, then left Sunday evening and been back Wednesday. That is 6 days, but you had them. You chose not to use them. Why? AOC's voice took on an edge. I think we need to be practical about. I agree completely. Practical. So you flew. But you didn't just fly. You flew first class. Johnson held up his tablet. Even from the back of the room, people could see it. The projection screen behind AOC showed her American Express statement. Continental Flight 1847. JFK to SFO. Date December 14th. Amount $1,427. First class costs $1,400. Coach on that same flight was $340. You spent an extra $1,000 taxpayer money since you expensed it through your congressional office for extra legroom and free champagne on a flight you say people shouldn't be taking at all. Can you explain that? The room was dead quiet now. Students were looking at each other, looking at the screen, looking at AOC. How did you get my credit card statement? Her voice was sharp. Now, that is a privacy. Public congressional financial disclosure, Johnson said calmly. You filed it yourself with the House Ethics Committee, as required by the Ethics in Government Act of 1978. It is public record. I didn't hack anything. I didn't violate anything. I just read what you disclosed. He reached into his folder and pulled out a thick stapled document. In fact, I have all your disclosures right here. In the past 18 months, you have taken 42 flights. 42. 28 of them were first class or business class. The remainder were coach, but mostly short flights where first class isn't available. He looked up from the document. 42 flights in 18 months, while telling Americans that flying is destroying the planet. 28 of those in first class, while telling working people they consume too much. Can you help me understand that? AOC's jaw was tight. Those were for congressional business. Some were, Johnson acknowledged. The San Francisco Climate Conference, I will grant you, that is congressional business. But what about Miami in December? You posted Instagram photos from South Beach. Much needed break, you wrote. You flew. Why not drive? It is a 29-hour drive from New York to Miami. Long, yes. But you are asking coal miners in West Virginia to sacrifice their jobs. You are asking farmers to sacrifice their livelihoods. You are asking working families to pay higher energy costs. But you are not willing to sacrifice a comfortable flight for a beach vacation? A male student near the front spoke up, his voice defensive. She has a right to take a vacation. Johnson turned to him. Absolutely. I agree. 100%. I am not saying she can't vacation. I am asking why she gets to fly to Miami for vacation while telling everyone else that flying for leisure is destroying the planet. Either it is destroying the planet, or it is not. If it is, she should drive or take the train. If it is not, she should stop saying it is. You can't have it both ways. The logic was brutal in its simplicity, and you could see it landing. Students were frowning, processing, some nodding slowly. AOC tried to regain control. This is a gotcha. No, ma'am. A gotcha is a trick question based on twisting your words. This is your financial disclosure compared to your public statements, your actions compared to your rhetoric. There is no trick. These are flights you took. These are things you said. I am just asking if they are consistent. Johnson didn't wait for her response. He was building momentum now, like a prosecutor in closing arguments. Let's talk about your car. You drive a Tesla Model S, correct? Yes, AOC said wearily. Beautiful car. I test drove one once. They are incredibly fast. You paid $89,000 for it. That is according to your financial disclosure from March 2025. Do you remember what you said about luxury cars 2 years ago? He pulled out his phone again, scrolled, and found what he was looking for. This is from your appearance on Pod Save America in June 2023. You said, and I quote, "No one needs a car that costs more than $50,000. Luxury cars are climate crimes. They are wealth hoarding on wheels. They are status symbols that kill the planet." End quote. Do you remember saying that? Silence followed. So my question is simple. If luxury cars are climate crimes, why do you drive one? Tesla is electric, AOC started. I know it is electric, Johnson said. Electric is better for emissions during operation. No question. But let's talk about how that car gets made. Do you know where Tesla sources the lithium for those batteries? More silence. Lithium mines in the Atacama Desert in Chile, in Argentina, and in Australia. The extraction process uses enormous amounts of water, about 500,000 gallons per ton of lithium in drought-prone regions, and it leaves behind toxic waste that contaminates groundwater. He paused. But lithium isn't the biggest problem. The real issue is cobalt. Your Tesla has about 22 pounds of cobalt in its battery. Do you know where most of the world's cobalt comes from? AOC didn't answer. The Democratic Republic of Congo, about 70% of global cobalt supply. And do you know how that cobalt is extracted? He looked down at his phone, reading from it. A 2019 Amnesty International report titled, "This is What We Die," documented the conditions. Open pit mines, many of them artisanal, which is a polite way of saying unregulated and dangerous. The report found that approximately 40,000 children work in these cobalt mines, some as young as 6 years old. They work 10 to 12-hour days, carrying sacks of rocks that weigh more than they do, breathing toxic dust that causes permanent lung damage, for about $1 a day. The auditorium was completely silent. Now this was different from the flights. This was about child exploitation. And these students, these were people who cared deeply about labor rights, about global justice, about human dignity. Johnson looked up from his phone directly at AOC. Your car, the Tesla Model S that you drive around Washington, that you have posted photos of yourself in front of, that you called My Baby on Instagram last spring, has a battery built with cobalt that was very likely extracted by child labor. When you bought that $89,000 car, did you know about the children in the Congo? AOC's face was flushed. All cars require resource extraction. True, Johnson said, but you could have bought a used car. You could have bought a much cheaper electric vehicle. A Nissan Leaf costs $30,000 and has a smaller battery, less cobalt. You could have taken public transportation. DC has an excellent metro system. You could have done what you tell poor people to do. Make do with less, make sacrifices, prioritize the planet over convenience, but instead, you bought an $89,000 luxury vehicle that required child labor in Africa, while telling working-class Americans that driving SUVs makes them complicit in climate destruction. He let that sit for a moment. Ma'am, is it a climate crime, or isn't it? Because if luxury cars are climate crimes, why do you get to drive one? And if they are not, why do you say they are? A young woman in the audience, maybe 20 years old, spoke up. Her voice was shaky. Is that true about the children? Johnson nodded. Amnesty International, 2019. I can give you the full citation. The report is called, This is What We Die. 4. Human Rights Abuses in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Power, the Global Trade in Cobalt. It is about 70 pages, very well documented. You could hear people pulling out their phones, Googling, checking the rustling of verification happening in real time. AOC tried to pivot. I am not going to stand here and be lectured about ethics by someone who voted against I voted for H.R. 4358, the Child Labor Deterrence Act. Johnson interrupted. You voted against it because you said it didn't go far enough, that it needed stronger provisions. But while you were voting against it for not being pure enough, you were driving a car built with the very child labor the bill tried to address. That isn't a lecture, Congresswoman. That is just a fact. Johnson flipped to another page in his folder. Let's talk about the Met Gala, September 2021. You wore that dress, white with Tax the Rich, written in red on the back. I remember it. Everyone remembers it. Very bold statement. AOC's expression shifted slightly. This felt like safer ground, as the Met Gala dress had been celebrated. I was using fashion as protest. How much did that dress cost? Pause. It was loaned to me by the designer, Aurora James. I didn't pay, but she had to make it. Custom dress. Hand-sewn for you specifically. Do you know what the materials and labor cost? I didn't pay for it. About $35,000, Johnson said. That is what reporters estimated based on similar custom pieces. Hand-sewn, message, luxury fabric, custom-fitted $35,000 for a dress you wore for about 4 hours. He pulled out another sheet. Do you know what the median household income is in your district? The Bronx and Queens communities you represent? He looked at the paper. $56,300 per year. The median family in your district makes $56,000 a year. The dress you wore to protest wealth inequality cost 2/3 of their annual income for one night. That landed differently because everyone in this room, students with debt, working side jobs, worried about rent, could do the math. $35,000. Most of them didn't have that much money total. But you didn't pay for it, a student called out, trying to defend her. No, Johnson agreed, she didn't. A wealthy designer gave it to her. Which raises the question, why does a wealthy designer give $35,000 worth of custom fashion to a congresswoman? What does the designer get in return? Access? Influence? The social capital of having AOC wear her design? He turned back to AOC. But let's set that aside. The deeper question is this. You wore a Tax the Rich message to an event where tickets cost $30,000 each. You were inside. You were a guest. You were part of it. You can't protest wealth from inside the castle while wearing a $35,000 dress. That is not protest. That is performance. AOC's voice rose. I was using my platform to do what? To tell rich people they are bad, while attending their party? While being photographed with billionaires? While eating food prepared by workers making minimum wage who weren't allowed to make eye contact with the guests? He leaned forward slightly. Congresswoman, there were actual protesters outside the Met Gala that night, climate activists who weren't allowed in. They were on the street in the cold holding signs. You could have stood with them. You could have protested from outside. But you went in, you got your hair done, put on a $35,000 dress, and partied with celebrities and billionaires. That is not fighting the system. That is joining it. You rent an apartment in Navy Yard, Johnson continued. He was methodical now, relentless. Nice neighborhood in D.C. One bedroom, about 750 square feet. Your rent is $2,800 per month. That is $33,600 per year. D.C. is expensive. I know. I live here too. But you have said repeatedly, and I have the quotes, that no one should have to pay more than 30% of their income on housing. That has been one of your core policy positions. You make $174,000 per year as a member of Congress. 30% of that would be $52,200. Your rent of $33,600 is only 19%. So actually, you are well under the threshold. He paused. Except your rent isn't your only housing cost. You also own a condominium in the Bronx, your grandmother's old place, which you bought from the estate in 2023. You pay a mortgage on it, property taxes, HOA fees. According to your financial disclosure, those total about $2,200 per month. Another $26,400 per year. He did the math out loud. So your total housing costs are about $60,000 per year. That is 34% of your congressional salary. You are spending more than the threshold you say no one should have to exceed. Why do you need two homes? It was a clever attack, not accusing her of being rich, but accusing her of not following her own rule. I need to maintain residency in my district. You could rent in the Bronx. There are studios in your district for $1,500 per month. Combined with your D.C. rent of $2,800, that would be $4,300 per month, about $52,000 per year, exactly 30% of your income. But you choose to own, to pay mortgage interest and HOA fees, to spend extra. That is your choice. But why do you get to make that choice while saying working families shouldn't have housing options that exceed 30% of income? AOC stood up from her chair. This is ridiculous. You are nitpicking every single detail. I am comparing your life to your rhetoric, Johnson said, still calm. You have built a career on telling people they consume too much, that they need to sacrifice, that the comfortable life they want is destroying the planet. But when I look at how you actually live, first-class flights, an $89,000 car, $35,000 dresses, two homes that put you above your own threshold, you are not making those sacrifices. You are living like every other comfortable member of Congress. He paused. And there is nothing wrong with that. You have earned your salary. You have a right to spend it. But there is something deeply wrong with demanding sacrifices from working people that you won't make yourself. With telling coal miners to accept unemployment while you fly first class to climate conferences, with saying luxury cars are crimes, while driving one built by child labor. Johnson pulled out one more document. This one had the official seal of the Federal Election Commission at the top. One last thing. Let's talk about your campaign finances. AOC's team sitting in the front row, visibly tensed. These are your campaign finance reports filed with the FEC, public record. He flipped through the pages. In the 2022 election cycle, Your campaign spent $212,000 on payments to a company called Saoirse Strategies. That is Saoirse. It means freedom in Irish. Do you know who owns Saoirse Strategies? Silence. Your boyfriend, Riley Roberts. Johnson gestured to the front row where Riley was sitting. Riley's face went pale. He owns it. It is his company. You paid your boyfriend's company $212,000 in campaign funds for consulting services. What did he consult on? That is completely legal, AOC started. I didn't say it was illegal. I am asking what services his company provided that justified $212,000. Campaign strategy? Digital outreach? Your campaign also employs a full-time communications director, a digital director, and 3 organizing consultants. What did your boyfriend's company do that your paid staff didn't do? He didn't wait for an answer. You also paid $180,000 to a company called Blue Horizon Media. Do you know who owns Blue Horizon Media? Your former chief of staff. So you paid your boyfriend's company $212,000 and your former chief of staff's company $180,000. That is $392,000 in campaign funds to people you are personally close to. An older man in the audience, faculty by his appearance, spoke up. Those payments are disclosed. They are legal. Johnson turned to him. They are disclosed because the law requires it. And legal doesn't necessarily mean ethical. Let me ask you something, Professor. If a Republican member of Congress paid their spouse's company $200,000 in campaign funds, would you think that was okay? Or would you call it corruption? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Johnson turned back to AOC. You have built your entire brand on being different, on being pure, on not being like the corrupt corporate Democrats or the bought and paid-for Republicans. I don't take corporate PAC money, you say. I am funded by working people. And that is true. You raised $17 million last cycle in small donations, average contribution of $27. He held up the FEC report. But what you don't tell those donors is that nearly $400,000 of their money from teachers and nurses and bartenders giving $27 at a time, went to your boyfriend's company and your former staffer's company for vaguely defined consulting. That is not people power, Congresswoman. That is a grift. The room erupted, not in applause, but in arguments. Students were debating each other, some defending AOC, some looking genuinely disturbed. The energy had completely changed. Johnson raised his voice slightly to be heard. You aren't different. You are just younger and better at Instagram. But the game is the same. Tell the people you are fighting for them. Collect their money. Spend it on yourself and your friends. That isn't democratic socialism. That is the same old corruption with better branding. AOC's voice was shaking now, either with anger or panic, or both. This is coordinated character assassination. These are your financial disclosures, Johnson said. Your FEC reports. Your public statements. All I did was read them and ask questions. A young woman stood up, row 7, left side. She had green hair and wore a Sunrise Movement shirt. Congresswoman? Her voice was trembling. Is it true about the child labor in the cobalt mines? AOC turned to look at her. This was supposed to be her audience, her people. It is more complicated than he is making it sound. Is it true? Yes or no? The young woman's voice was stronger now. Are children mining cobalt for Tesla batteries? A long pause followed. The entire room was waiting. The supply chain for electric vehicles involves mineral extraction that in some cases, in certain countries, labor standards aren't what the young woman said, her voice breaking. You drive a car built by children while telling us we are destroying the planet by driving our parents' old Hondas? She sat down, but others were standing now. A young man, maybe 22, asked, What about the boyfriend's company? Did you pay him $212,000 of donor money? My campaign paid for legitimate consulting services. That is not what he asked. Another student interrupted. Did you pay your boyfriend's company money that people donated to your campaign? The payments were for services rendered. An older woman stood, a faculty member probably. I donated to your campaign. I gave $27 a month for 18 months. That is almost $500. Did my money go to pay your boyfriend for consulting? The questions were coming faster now. The room was turning. Not all of it, there were still defenders, still true believers who thought this was all a right-wing smear. But the cracks were showing. Doubt was spreading. How many flights did you say? 42? Why do you need 2 apartments? Did you know about the cobalt when you bought the Tesla? AOC looked around the room at faces that had been adoring 90 minutes ago and now looked confused, disappointed, betrayed. She looked at her team in the front row. Marcus was frantically typing on his phone. Jen looked stricken. Riley was staring at his shoes. She turned back to Johnson. You came here to humiliate me. Johnson's voice was quiet. I came here to ask questions. You could have answered them honestly. You could have said, yes, I flew first class, and that was a mistake. You could have said, yes, I drive a luxury car and I should have researched the supply chain better. You could have said, yes, I paid my boyfriend's company and in hindsight, that looks bad, and I will change that. You could have owned it. He paused. But instead, you are defending it while still telling working people they consume too much, while still saying others need to sacrifice. That is what I came here to expose, not you personally. The hypocrisy. AOC started gathering her things, her phone, her notes, her water bottle. Her hands were shaking slightly. Maya, the student organizer, rushed onto the stage. Congresswoman, we still have 30 minutes scheduled. I am not doing this, AOC said, her voice tight. This was supposed to be a forum about climate solutions, not an ambush. It is only an ambush if you can't answer the questions, Johnson called from the back. She shot him a look that could melt steel. Then she walked, not running but moving fast, her heels clicking on the wooden stage floor, click, 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 loud in the suddenly quiet auditorium. She reached the side exit, pushed through the door, and was gone. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud that echoed. The audience sat in stunned silence. The projection screen behind the stage still showed her credit card statement, frozen, on display. 1,500 people didn't know what to do. Johnson stood up. I have 30 more pages of her disclosures here. Does anyone want to see them? Or should we call it a night? For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a student near the front said, Show us. Another voice joined in. Yeah, we want to see. Show us everything. And that was when it got really bad for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because Mike Johnson spent the next 45 minutes going through the rest of her financial disclosures. Her speaking fees of $40,000 per appearance at some corporate events, her book deal, advance of $350,000, brand partnerships she had done, investments she had made. The students didn't leave. They stayed. They listened. They asked questions. They took notes. And with each new revelation, you could see the cognitive dissonance resolving itself. The woman they had believed in, the champion of the working class, lived like the elite she claimed to fight against. Not all of them turned. Some remained loyal, convinced this was all a hit job. But many others, maybe half the room, left with questions they couldn't answer. Why does she get to fly first class? Why does she drive a car built by child labor? Why did my $27 donation pay her boyfriend? By the time Johnson finished, it was almost 9 p.m. About half the audience had trickled out. The energy was gone. What had started as a celebration had turned into an autopsy. Johnson gathered his papers, thanked the remaining students for their time, and left through a side exit. The footage was everywhere within an hour. not from CNN or MSNBC, but from the students themselves. They had been filming on their phones, from multiple angles and different perspectives, and they uploaded everything. The clip that went most viral wasn't even AOC walking out. It was a 19-second moment. Johnson, did you know about the child labor in the cobalt mines when you bought the Tesla? AOC? Long pause. The supply chain is complicated. Student, that is a yes. You knew. That clip got 20 million views in the first 12 hours. The second most viral clip was the boyfriend's company question. The moment Johnson said $212,000 to your boyfriend's company, and the camera caught Riley's face going pale. Twitter exploded. But not in the way AOC's team expected. Yes, conservatives were sharing the clips gleefully. AOC exposed as fraud. The socialist drives a child labor car. Predictable stuff. But what really hurt were the progressive accounts, the left-wing activists who had defended her for years. I have knocked doors for AOC. I have donated. I have defended her against every attack. But paying your boyfriend $200K in campaign funds? That is not what I signed up for. 127,000 likes. The child labor thing is bothering me, like really bothering me. We can't claim to care about global justice and then drive cars built by 6-year-olds. 89,000 likes. I don't think AOC is evil. I think she got comfortable. And that is exactly what we were afraid would happen. Meet the new boss. Same as the old boss. 156,000 likes. The Democratic Socialists of America issued a statement. It was careful, lawyerly. We believe all elected officials, including our allies, should be held accountable to the values they espouse. We encourage self-reflection and course correction. Translation: we are not defending this. The Sunrise Movement was more direct. Their national Twitter account posted, "Climate justice means justice for everyone, including children in Congo cobalt mines. No exceptions, not for anyone." They didn't mention AOC by name. They didn't have to. By Friday morning, the New York Times had a piece. Ocasio-Cortez faces questions about lifestyle and campaign spending. The article was balanced, factual, and devastating. It laid out everything Johnson had presented, verified it against public records, and asked the obvious question: how can you demand sacrifice from others while not sacrificing yourself? AOC's office released a statement Friday afternoon. It was 2 pages long. It called Johnson's questions bad faith attacks designed to distract from his party's climate denialism. It said the FEC filings were completely legal and properly disclosed. It defended the Tesla as a necessary investment in reducing my personal carbon footprint. It said the campaign payments to Saurisa Strategies were for legitimate consulting services rendered. What the statement didn't do was address the central question. Why do you get to live comfortably while telling working people to sacrifice? The polls came Monday. An internal poll from her campaign leaked to Politico. Her favorability in her district had dropped 15 points, from 63% to 48%, in less than a week. Among voters under 30, her core base, the young people who had made her a political celebrity, the drop was even steeper, 22 points, from 71% favorable to 49%. The crosstabs were devastating. When asked, "Do you think AOC genuinely represents working-class interests?" the number dropped from 68% yes to 44% yes. When asked, "Do you think AOC lives by the values she promotes?" it dropped from 61% yes to 33% yes. That is the number that kills campaigns. 33%. 2/3 of her own constituents no longer believed she practiced what she preached. 3 weeks later, a primary challenger announced. Her name was Maria Santos, 32 years old. A high school teacher in the Bronx who made $68,000 a year, lived in a rent-stabilized apartment, rode the subway, and had never flown first class in her life. Her announcement video opened with her standing outside a public school. "My name is Maria Santos. I am a teacher. I live in the Bronx. I take the subway to work. I shop at the same bodegas as my neighbors. And when I say working people need to sacrifice for the climate, I make those sacrifices myself. That is the difference." The video had 3 million views in 24 hours. Her campaign slogan appeared on posters across the district within days. "She walks the walk." AOC tried to fight back. She did the media rounds, The View, Pod Save America, The Breakfast Club. She explained context. She defended her choices. She said she was being held to an impossible standard. But the damage was done. Because it wasn't Republicans who were attacking her. It was her own people. The progressives who had believed in her, who felt betrayed, who felt like they had been sold a lie. Mike Johnson, for his part, didn't gloat. He didn't do victory laps on Fox News. 3 days after the Georgetown event, his office released a one-sentence statement. "If you are going to ask Americans to make sacrifices for the climate, for social justice, for any cause, you should be willing to make those sacrifices yourself. That is not partisan politics. That is basic integrity." It was hard to argue with that. By March, AOC's lead in the primary polls had evaporated. She was tied with Maria Santos. By April, she was behind. By May, she was down 8 points. In June, she lost the primary, not by a little, but by 14 points. The largest defeat for an incumbent member of Congress in New York in modern history. Her concession speech was brief. She talked about fighting the good fight, about speaking truth to power, about how corporate interests and right-wing smear campaigns had aligned against her. She didn't mention the Tesla, or the first-class flights, or her boyfriend's consulting company, or the children in the cobalt mines. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe admitting the hypocrisy would have been too much. Maybe she genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong, that she was being held to an unfair standard, that she deserved comfort because she was fighting for justice. Or maybe, and this is what I think what a lot of people came to think, maybe she had just gotten comfortable. Maybe the bartender from the Bronx, who had shocked the world, had become exactly what she had run against. Another politician who said one thing and did another, who demanded sacrifice from others but not from herself, who used donor money to enrich friends and family, who talked about the people while living like the elite. It wasn't Mike Johnson who destroyed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's political career. It was the gap between her rhetoric and her reality. The distance between what she said and what she did. The contradiction between the image she had built and the life she actually lived. Johnson just pointed it out in front of 1,500 people who had come to believe in her. And once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. That is the thing about hypocrisy. It isn't a policy disagreement you can debate. It isn't a partisan attack you can dismiss. It is just the truth about who you really are versus who you claim to be. And once that truth is exposed, no amount of explaining can put the mask back on. 3 months after losing her primary, AOC took a job as a political commentator. Good pay, comfortable life. She gave speeches about climate justice and economic inequality. She still had millions of followers on social media, but she wasn't in Congress anymore. She wasn't making laws. She wasn't representing working people. She had become exactly what she had always criticized. Someone who talks about revolution from a position of comfort. Someone who profits from progressive politics without living progressive values. The Green New Deal, she had championed it, but it never passed. Parts of it were absorbed into other bills, watered down, compromised away. But on a Tuesday night, in a Georgetown auditorium, the movement she had built learned an important lesson. If you are going to demand that others change their lives, you had better be willing to change yours first. If you are going to call for sacrifice, you had better be willing to sacrifice. If you are going to fight the system, you can't become part of it. It is a simple lesson, but apparently, It is one that even the most celebrated progressive of her generation couldn't learn. Or maybe she learned it just too late.